Well, welcome to Growing Roses in the Pacific Northwest. Look at this stunning rose. A rose can be the star of any garden. And in the Pacific Northwest, steady rainfall, long summer evenings, and mild winters create ideal growing conditions. After all, Portland is the city of roses. Now, I know some of you may be watching from other parts of our country, so I made sure I included a map here to show you exactly where the Pacific Northwest is located. By the way, did you know that during the Lewis and Clark Exposition, which was held in Portland in 1905, hundreds of thousands of roses were planted throughout the city of Portland? There was such a positive response from visitors and residents, it was decided that Portland should have an annual rose festival. And that first Rose Festival committee wanted roses planted along the entire festival route. What a great idea, right? Well, when they decided to plant so many roses, that was a lot, they needed a rose variety that was abundantly available. So they selected Madame Caroline Testu, a fragrant pink tea rose. And if you explore the parts of Old North Portland, you can still see this rose growing in some street-side gardens. That just shows you how long roses can live in a person's garden. Not only is it long-lived, but a rose can be a rewarding shrub to have in your landscape. How many plants do you go to the nursery and get that come in a variety of colors, is fragrant, and blooms repeatedly throughout the season? However, I must say that new as well as seasoned gardeners living in the Pacific Northwest sometimes become discouraged because they've had a bad experience by placing a rose in the wrong space, perhaps not monitoring enough for diseases, or they decided to do a little bit of research and they were overwhelmed by excessive and confusing information regarding how to grow and care for roses. Well, today I hope I debunk all that and you will find a space in your landscape for a beautiful rose. Here's what I hope you take away from today's presentation: how to select a rose that will be perfect for your garden, the basic steps for preparing the planting site, when and how to fertilize, prune, and water your rose, how to maintain your rose and monitor for pests and disease. Before we get going, let's talk about the classifications of roses. The more information you have about all the rose types available to you, the better it will be for you selecting one for your garden. Well, there are over 40,000 named roses. The American Rose Society defines the rose classifications according to their origin and their botanical characteristics, and they also maintain the records of all registered roses. This classification method is great because it allows gardeners to foresee the growth habit and understand how to provide proper care for many different kinds of roses. Basically, roses are classified into three main groups: species or wild roses, old garden roses, and modern roses. Let's take a closer look at each of those classifications. Now, species or wild roses are native varieties, and they have large bushes with a single flat flower, as shown here on the far right. They bloom once in late spring or early summer. They have beautiful rose hips once the blooms fade. This is a stunning addition to a garden. You will notice that this rose variety tends to grow and spread aggressively, so you will need to allow plenty of space for them to flourish. There are several cultivars of this native wild rose that includes the bald hip rose, the rugosa rose, the woods rose, and the clustered rose. And you're probably most familiar with the Nootka rose. This is the one that I find around most often. Typically, people who want an all-native plant garden and desire a rose as part of that will select one of these rose types for their garden. And why not? They work well for hedgerows, and they give that natural wild garden look. I do want you to be aware that there are two varieties or species of these wild roses that are considered invasive in eastern parts of Oregon. It's the sweetbrier rose and the dog rose. These two species do make a thick hedgerow, but it also prevents the cattle from getting to water. It is best to avoid these two species, particularly if you live in the east side of the state. And of course, never plant a rose bush or any kind of bush that is unidentified and might cause you problems in the future. Old garden roses were roses that were developed before 1867. Now, this type of rose has some real history. It dates back to Napoleon and Josephine, the Romans, Greeks, and Egyptians. For that reason, many rose growers are especially fond of this rose type because they're romantic. They're strongly scented with abundant blooms, and yet they're tough enough to withstand cold temperatures. Generally, rose growers consider them to require less care than some other rose types. Some of these types of roses only bloom once, but any of the hybrids that originated in China do produce blooms twice in a season. These old garden roses are durable and will last many years in your garden if you plant it in the appropriate spot. You will find these roses for sale at large nurseries or available from a reputable rose company, either from their website or catalog. These three roses are old garden rose varieties that perform really well in the Pacific Northwest and includes autumn damask. You can see why it got that name for that beautiful fall color. Stanwell perpetual and Comte de Chambord. Look at the detail in the bud of that rose. It's just loaded with petals and very, very fragrant. Now we come to modern roses. Modern roses were developed after 1867, and they have a number of subcategories that I feel you will recognize the names of. The hybrid tea, the grandiflora, the floribunda, shrub, landscape, and large flowered climbing roses are all in this category. I'm going to show you a little bit more about each one of those. Let's start with the hybrid tea rose. Now this is the classic rose with the perfectly formed single flower on a long, strong stem. Some of them have fragrance and some do not, but you will find them available in a wide variety of colors. Now this rose, unfortunately, this rose is a repeat bloomer, but the downside is it can be a little bit fussy and disease prone. So make sure if you want a hybrid tea that you select a variety that is disease resistant. Now, if we have a really, really wet spring, and we have had them in the past, even the most disease-resistant cultivar will have problems. But if you start out with a disease-resistant plant, you're way ahead of the game. Pictured here is the rose Francis Meand, and it was the All-American Rose Selection by the American Rose Society and selected in 2006. And it almost looks, I mean, too perfect. Absolutely perfect. This funny little in parentheses number is the American Rose Society's designation. It's the way they identify each of the registered roses. Floribunda roses were developed by crossing a hybrid tea rose with a polyantha rose. A polyantha rose is a shrub rose that has multiple flowers. Excuse me, Floribunda roses were developed by crossing a hybrid tea with a polyantha rose. A polyantha rose is a shrub rose that has multiple flowers. It can it can have single to double flowers with a continuous bloom from late spring to first frost. They are usually quite fragrant and come in many colors. And this one I wanted to point out has an average height of 3 to 4 feet. This is Easter basket. It's very appropriately named and has that, this is that American Rose Society designation again. The grandiflora rose. A grandiflora rose is a cross between a hybrid tea and a floribunda. This rose has repeat blooms of large fragrant flowers that grow in clusters. Now this one grows between 3 to 6 feet in height, so it's a little bit taller. You must always consider the mature size of a rose when you select it for your garden space, and this one might do best if it's planted in the back of the flower bed and not in the front of the flower bed due to its height. Shrub and landscape roses. Now, these are very popular due to their nonstop blooming and their disease resistance. They're pretty robust and they have a very relaxed, informal growth habit. The knockout, drift, and flower carpet series of roses are included in this category. Pictured here on the left is flower carpet amber, which is the only flower carpet series rose with a fragrance. On the right is the knockout rose lemon fizz. Now, knockout, drift, and carpet roses are easy to care for and they self-clean. No need to deadhead these. Landscape roses tend to be more horizontal than vertical, and they work really well as hedges or in mass groupings. They tend to root themselves along the ground. That makes them very perfect for slopes. I visited with a lady who had these stunning landscape roses along a retaining wall, tumbling over the retaining wall. And I asked her, gee, how much time she spent taking care of them. And she said, I don't do hardly anything to these roses. They just take care of themselves. I didn't put in the sizes of these varieties as they vary greatly depending on the type that you might select. David Austin roses. Now, I have rose growing friends who simply love their David Austin roses. David Austin was a British breeder who set out to create the perfect rose. In the 1950s, he was captivated by the charm of old garden roses, but he thought they lacked the repeat blooming quality and the range of colors that modern hybrid floribundas produced. His solution? Cross old garden roses with modern varieties. He could blend beauty, fragrance, and vigor into something new. In my research, it was noted that due to the abundance and size of the blooms on David Austin roses, they tend to droop or nod a little bit because they're so heavy. But the overall consensus was that nobody mattered one single bit because they were so beautiful and fragrant. This is the Rosa Constance Spry, his first successful hybrid, a stunning pink bloom with unforgettable perfume. And look at the detail in that blossom. Today, there are over 200,000 cultivars and many loyal David Austin fans around the globe. Climbing roses. Now, roses really don't climb by winding around structures like a vine will do. So a climbing variety rose refers to a rose that produces very long, flexible canes that you can train along a support system. A wall, a trellis, or a doorway can be adorned with beautiful blooms, particularly if you train the canes as horizontal as possible. That way it will produce more flowers on the horizontal canes than the vertical canes due to apical dominance. Apical dominance is what causes most plants to grow a strong vertical leader. When that leader is trained on horizontally, as on the climbing rose, it will form lateral branches which will have more energy to produce flowers all along the stem instead of just producing flowers near the top. Climbing roses also have repeat blooms, are fragrant, and disease resistant. Pictured here on the left is Cecil Bruner. This one will tolerate dappled shade. And on the right, Peggy Martin, which is a resilient, thornless climbing rose variety. Absolutely stunning. Rambler roses. Now, Rambler roses, similar to the climbing rose varieties, is admired for its flush of small blooms that it produces in June and July. As like many of the wild varieties of roses, this Rambler produces a single rose instead of big double roses, but it develops these lovely rose hips as the blossoms fade. You can see from these photos that Ramblers have a vigorous, arching, and carefree habit, but it requires a lot of space. They can grow up a tree. They can cover a barn or a shed, which is really a stunning thing to see. Or they can tumble over a wall or climb on a sturdy support. I would say this, due to its rather aggressive nature in growing, it may not be suitable for a small garden. Now, if you live in an apartment or a condominium, or you just desire a miniature version of a hybrid tea or floribunda rose, This rose type is perfect for you. Now, the origin of these roses is a little bit murky, but they feel like that it's probably descended from the old Chinese rose, Rosa chinensis. They're small, bushy shrubs, hardy, and well suited for containers or small garden spaces. 6 hours of sunlight and good air circulation should reward you with a carefree rose type inside or out. And notice this mass planting of miniature roses in a botanical garden. A nice punch of color. And of course, this one you can grow inside your house. Sometimes short height is an advantage. Now, before you decide which of these many rose types you desire in your garden, you might want to see what they look like in a natural garden setting. So consider visiting a public garden with a variety of rose types. If you're fortunate enough to live in the Portland area, the International Rose Test Garden or Peninsula Park are both wonderful choices. But wherever you live in our country, there are formal and informal gardens in most large cities. Now, let's talk about your garden. If you choose the right rose for the right place, it will grow without you having to do much of anything. But for optimum performance, follow these steps. Make sure the site you select has at least 6 hours of sunlight each day. Make sure you always respect the mature size of your rose shrub so that you provide adequate space for it to look its best. Select a color and a type of rose that complements your garden. Maybe it's going to be a tea rose, maybe it's a climbing rose. Make sure you always purchase your roses from a reputable supplier or nursery where you can select either a bare root or a potted specimen. And choose wisely. Read the tag. Make sure it is disease resistant. And ideally enough, you will find roses available from February through March. Perfect timing, but shop early so you get the best selection. I want to stop here a minute to mention the difference between an own root rose and a grafted rose. An own root rose, as seen here on the right, is propagated from a cutting and will establish its own strong roots. This type of rose is very resilient to cold temperatures and can live up to 50 years in your garden. It will also continue to produce consistent blooms throughout the growing season. On the left, you will find a grafted rose. A grafted rose features a knob or graft union where a desired variety of rose is attached to the rootstock of a hardy variety of rose. Why do that? Well, it allows for faster initial growth and vigor. The blooms tend to be earlier and more abundant, and grafted roses are more tolerant of poor soils. However, the only downside is that they are a bit more sensitive to cold temperatures, and if it happens to be frozen hard and killed back to the ground, it will not regrow as the same variety. I thought you might enjoy seeing some examples of how gardeners have used roses to complement their landscape. On the far left here at the top is a climbing rose. It's a backdrop for a very formal rose garden that's in the front of it. In these two photos, they have decided to plant shrub roses all along this walkway. The whole distance is really a long walkway. They're in full sun and they bloom all season long. In the lower left, you'll see this gardener has chosen to plant two roses just in the bed with their shrubs and other perennials. And this last photo, this is one of my favorites, and I wish my photo did greater justice to this lady's lovely garden. She has planted a climbing rose near the front along with a clematis. She's got tea roses along the side of the house. She has shrub roses in here. She's integrated roses throughout her landscape, and it's a very relaxed look and a great complement to her garden. It's really a lovely sight all summer long. Once you have selected a rose variety and you think you know the spot where you want to put it, where it will perform its best, it's time to plant. Well, March is great planting time for bare root and containerized roses in Western Oregon. Why? Well, the soil temperatures have warmed up above 40 degrees. If you plant the roses in March, the plants will have time to establish adequate roots to withstand the heat of summer. And it also aligns with the timing of roses breaking dormancy. If you live east of the mountains in central or eastern Oregon, get out your soil thermometer. Wait until April or May when you know the soil has warmed up enough, 40 degrees above. Don't plant in too cold of soil. Then preparing your planting site. Well, once you've selected a site, have your soil tested so that you know the pH and what amendments are recommended, if any. You do want your roses to perform the very best, so take some time prepping that soil. Roses enjoy a loose, organic, moist, but well-drained soil. The pH should be between 6.2 to 6.8. And be sure you fork any amendments 6 to 12 inches into the soil. I've included 2 articles here that discuss organic amendments and a link to a soil testing laboratory. Now, if you're someone who likes to look through catalogs or check out rose supply websites, you might wish to order a bare root rose from a reputable supplier. There are many out there who provide wonderful bare root stock for planting. I have noticed in the last years that garden centers have kind of stopped selling bare root roses. I used to see them all the time. The bare root roses are harvested while they're dormant and shipped without soil or foliage in a moist container. You can see in this photo here that the box is lined with plastic to keep the roses moist. When your roses arrive, inspect them. They should be firm and heavy with light colored roots. Check the canes for dark spots, lesions, breaks, or any insect damage. Cut off any damaged roots to eliminate an entry point for any diseases. And if there happen to be any leaves left on the plant, just remove them. When you have your planting site prepared, soak your roses in a bucket of water for 2 to 24 hours to rehydrate the plant. Planting a bare root rose, you'll need to dig a planting hole 18 to 24 inches deep. That way, the full spread of the roots is possible. You can see from this picture they're spreading out. In the center of the hole, create a cone-shaped mound of soil on which you can rest the plant and support the roots. That way, it will promote outward growth. If you're planting your grafted rose in zone 3 through 6, where it's kind of cold, make sure you plant that graft or bud union 2 to 4 inches below the soil level to protect it from that cold. If you live in zone 7 to 11, then 1 to 2 inches is adequate to protect the graft. Note I've also included articles with more information about planting here. You will find an array of containerized roses at the garden center, beginning about now. After purchasing your selection, prepare a hole 3 to 4 inches wider and as deep as the container. When you're ready to plant your rose, remove it from the pot and examine the roots, kind of like you would do if you've gotten a bare root rose. The roots should be abundant enough to hold the shape of the pot, but certainly not encircled in any way. You want to coax those roots outward before planting. So if you need to remove a bit of soil, like they're doing here at the bottom of the plant, putting the soil in the hole, encourage that outward growth. You want to feather them out because the outward growth is going to support that plant from now on. And you'll see many containerized roses looking just like this at the nursery. Backfill the hole with soil, pressing gently so you remove any air pockets. If it's a grafted rose, it does need to be planted a little bit deeper to protect it from cold, particularly if you're in zone 3 through 6. If you live in the Willamette Valley, you can plant the rose at 1 or 2 inches deep, if it's grafted, the crown, or at grade. And then you can mound up soil around the base of the plant to protect it for the first 2 to 3 weeks of growing so that it doesn't desiccate any new growth that happens. It's going to take some time for these roses to start growing because their roots need to develop first. That's what you want, a strong root system. Need to water them well to settle the soil and roots. Then mulch with bark or more or compost. That will retain moisture and slow evaporation. I would encourage you to keep a close eye on your roses the first 2 to 3 weeks. That's when they're most at risk of drying out. Although if we have, a wet spring, that won't be a problem. But keep an eye on them. You may have one flower bed dedicated to roses, or your rose may be tucked into a perennial border bed. Either way, it's important that roses get enough air circulation so it will decrease any insect or disease damage that, that might creep around. Always check the label on the plant for the mature height and width, and often they include spacing recommendations, but just in case, as a rule, miniature roses should be planted 2 to 2.5 feet apart, depending on the variety of miniature rose. The grandiflora, floribunda, and hybrid teas should be spaced 2.5 to 3 feet apart. Now, roses need water, but not too much water. They dislike having wet feet. So water deeply every 5 to 7 days and water the entire bed, not just the root ball. That way, the roots will be encouraged to spread out. On average, roses require 1 inch of water per week. That's for established roses. If you have a newly planted rose, it will need twice that amount of water in the first year of its growth. It will take some time for the roots to grow and spread. I encourage you to avoid overhead watering. Consider a drip irrigation system or soaker hoses. Water that remains on foliage throughout the day will increase that plant's susceptibility to disease. But mulching with wood bark or coarse compost will retain moisture and slow evaporation around the plant. I've just given you general guidelines, and the amount of water your plant needs will depend upon weather, soil, and time of year. Monitor your roses for best performance. Fertilize your roses when 4 to 6 inches of new growth appears. Select an appropriate fertilizer based on your soil test results. But I do think this diagram shows an excellent way to fertilize your roses so the root zone is getting the benefit of the fertilizer. You will fertilize every 4 to 6 weeks during the growing season, but make sure you stop it in late summer, say August and September, as the roses are beginning to go dormant, because you don't want to stimulate any new growth that can be damaged by cold weather. If you have a rose planted in a container, as I said, I will talk about roses planted in a container in a minute. Growing roses in a container. Now, if you're short of garden space or you live in an apartment or condominium, or maybe you just want a beautiful rose right by your front door, then it makes good sense to plant your rose in a container. However, select a rose that will do well in a container. Not all of them will. So let's discuss which varieties would be the most successful. Here are the criteria: fragrant, small size, constant bloom. The ones that do best include miniature roses, ground cover roses, small hybrid teas, David Austin roses, the knockout variety roses, and floribunda roses. Now, when you're selecting a pot, choose one that's at least 18 inches or larger in diameter. And from my personal experience, I have found that a container with straight sides will assist me in repotting or replacing the rose without damaging the pot or damaging the rose plant. Make sure that that pot has adequate drainage, lots of holes in the bottom. Roses really will not tolerate wet feet. Always use a good quality potting soil and add some slow release or organic fertilizer. Fertilize in the spring when new growth has reached 2 to 3 inches, but continue to fertilize that rose every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the season. And of course, you're going to need to water it more frequently because pots do dry out much faster than plants that are in the ground. On warm days, I sometimes have to water my pots every day. Now, if you've had that rose in a pot for 2 to 3 years, you might consider refreshing the soil, and then while you're at it, maybe root pruning that plant to increase its vigor and to control the size. To root prune, remove the rose from the pot, like shown here, and then slice around the periphery of the root ball. You can slice off 1/4 of the bottom of the plant without any harm to the plant. That way you can loosen the remaining roots and repot the plant. Make sure you water well after planting. Maintain your potted rose just like you would any rose in the garden. Pruning, fertilizing, watering, and monitoring for pests and diseases. Which brings us right up to pruning. Well, pruning is a must-do job for spring. Why? It encourages new growth and a succession of blooms for the coming season. Pruning should be done in about mid-February to early March, so now's the time. Many gardeners use President's Day as their indicator. I need to think about pruning my roses. But do avoid pruning too early, as it may cause dieback, and then you'll have to go back and reprune. For successful pruning, you have to be equipped. You'll need a pair of bypass pruners, some loppers, and a pair of long gloves that will adequately protect your hands and forearms. You don't want those thorns and canes to get you. Remember to keep all of your tools sharp for best performance and disinfect them after use with alcohol. Dry after cleaning. I've attached an article that will give you some more tips on taking care of your garden tools so they work their best. Steps for pruning all rose type. This includes all rose types, is the removal of all canes, dead, diseased, or damaged. Your goal is to promote healthy growth, improve air circulation, and to shape the plant. Remove any canes that are smaller than a pencil. They're not going to bear any blooms. Make a clean, perpendicular cut at above 1/4 to 1/2 an inch above an outward-facing bud. A good example is right over here. You see my little pointer. There's an outward-facing bud, and there's a cut. There's an outward-facing bud, there's a cut. There's an outward-facing bud and a cut. And when I say perpendicular cut, you're going to find that if you read up on any rose books or articles, that often say that you need to cut at a 45-degree angle to prevent water from collecting on the top of the cane. But that's kind of a myth. The fact is, the smaller the wound, the better. It will heal and prevent fungal disease if it heals more quickly. You can see from this illustration on the right, it will show you exactly the kind of cut to make when you're trimming your roses. After spring pruning, apply a dormant oil spray to coat the canes and suffocate any overwintering pests and fungus. And of course, it is as the name implies, dormant spray is meant to be put on when there are no leaves on the rose canes at all. The plant is still dormant. Now, roses will perform best when they're pruned properly for the type of rose they are as well. So I've included this slide that shows that hybrid tea roses and floribundas should be pruned 12 to 18 inches in height. Grandiflora roses should be pruned moderately, 24 to 36 inches. This is a larger plant and it grows multiple flowers on a stem, so be more moderate in your pruning of this plant. Well, on the other hand, shrub and landscape roses should be pruned down by 1/3, or if they're well established, you can prune them down by half. Ground cover roses are pruned to shape the bush. Just remove any long canes. That'll help you control the size that you need for your landscape. David Austin roses are pruned 18 to 24 inches in height. However, I have noted that there are some new varieties of David Austin roses that have been hybridized to a smaller size with a more upright habit, so you would treat them like a hybrid tea or grandiflora. More pruning information is available at this link. Now, you're probably wondering about climbing roses. Yes, they do need to be pruned differently. If you have a brand new climbing rose, then you will just plant it and train the canes as horizontally as possible to encourage these lateral or side branches. You want flowers all over that plant. If you have a well-established climbing rose that's already trained into a horizontal position, your pruning job should be a bit easier. You will want to cut back canes that have outgrown its support system, and you will want to prune down your laterals till there are just 2 or 3 buds, so about 2 to 4 inches. You're going to remove any old unproductive canes completely to the ground level. And then often this will require you to untie your roses from the support system, do the pruning, and then retie the pruned canes. Rambling roses. Well, this variety of rose blooms on last year's growth, so it's pruned in late summer after the rose hips have faded and some of the leaves are falling off, and you can see the structure without leaves. Like with everything, remove all dead, damaged, or diseased canes, and then remove 1 in 3 of the remaining canes to the ground, and then retie the remaining canes to the support. Again, horizontal is great. Shorten any of the side shoots by 1/2, and that will encourage more branching of the plant. Now, winter care of your roses may mean you need to lightly prune them in November to prevent wind damage and, as a result, rocking of the roots. If you have tall hybrid tea, grandiflora, and floribunda roses, they should be pruned down several inches to prevent wind damage. But if they are not tall or they're not at risk of any wind damage, maybe you have them planted in a protected space, just leave the pruning until spring. Shrub roses, as the one shown here, should be lightly pruned to prevent the wind from whipping those canes all around. But save major pruning and shaping until spring. Do remove all remaining leaves on the plant. That will encourage dormancy. And of course, you're going to remove anything you find falling on the ground to prevent overwintering pests and diseases. Okay, in addition to pruning them lightly, you'll need to protect those lovely roses that you planted in a container. After they've dropped their leaves and gone dormant, when those temperatures start to dip to freezing, you can move the container using a cart, or perhaps your husband will lift it for you, into a garage or shed that's dark and unheated. If that's not possible, then just move them up next to the house, as pictured here. This one's pretty close to the house also. You can group several together for added protection. You can also wrap the pots with bubble wrap, burlap, or a blanket to protect the root zone because it is exposed. I see this person elected to put black plastic around there, which any sunlight will, of course, make warm up immediately. Okay, this is a problem for me and it may be a problem for you. One of the biggest issues with roses in containers is that the roots become desiccated. There's because of cold temps, wind, and no precipitation. And I have a tendency to put my rose under an overhang of my roof next to my house. Well, then out of sight is out of mind. I kind of forget it. So I have to write myself a note so I don't forget that they still need water so the roots do not become desiccated. 1 gallon of water every 2 weeks should fix that problem. If they're outside like these and they're getting rain and you see that they're adequately moist, then no worries. Some thoughts on maintenance. Well, during the growing season, maintenance is important. So remove spent flowers. You'll get more blooms. To remove spent flowers, cut the cane just above an outward facing bud with a 5-leaf leaflet. You can see pictured right here. You can see where they cut here earlier. It grew up, and now they're going to cut again here, and it will grow up. Interestingly, the farther down on the plant you prune, the longer it will take to rebloom, but the blossoms will be pretty large. If you are a moderate pruner, prune only just to this first 5-leaf leaflet, it will rebloom more quickly, but the blossom will probably be smaller. Of course, you're going to keep your rose flower bed free of leaves, flowers, or falling canes to prevent the spread of any disease. Now, I did hear a helpful hint. A shop vac might pick those leaves and petals up off the ground for me. Won't work for me, but it might work for you. So you might like to give it a try. Environmental insect and disease problems. Well, when it comes to insects and diseases, you should monitor frequently. That rose bush will do a lot better if you catch a problem before it becomes much too advanced. It's a win-win for you and for your rose. Sometimes there's environmental damage caused by fertilizer, a drift of herbicide, or perhaps overwatering. Paying attention will help you remedy that problem pretty quickly. Diseases like black spot rust and powdery mildew are out there, but if you catch them early, it's all the better. And of course, the ever popular aphid. Let's discuss prevention measures and examine the most common problems you might encounter when growing your roses. These are the prevention steps. Let's stop problems before they arise. Select strong disease-resistant cultivars. Since many of the diseases I'll discuss in a minute will involve high humidity and moisture on leaves, try to avoid overhead watering. At least don't do it late in the day. Wet leaves invite problems. Provide adequate air circulation by spacing your plants in the flower bed and by pruning annually. Practice good sanitation. Remove all fallen leaves and canes from the bed regularly. Avoid excessive nitrogen fertilizer. That causes a flush of growth that makes foliage susceptible to foliar diseases and, interestingly enough, more tasty to aphids. They enjoy nitrogen-rich plants. Let's look at the common diseases and problems with roses. Black spot. This is the most prevalent disease faced by rose growers in the Pacific Northwest. It's what caused some people to give up on roses and consider it a difficult plant, but it's not true. The problem is caused by the parasitic fungus Diplocarpon rosae, which causes small black spots with feathery edges to appear on the upper surface of the leaves. You can see them right here. Spots kind of merge together and the tissue around them will begin to turn yellow. Raised purple splotches appear on immature wood canes. So look at the canes as well as the leaves. In order for this to thrive, the spores must be wet for 7 hours. Spores germinate in the spring and are spread to susceptible young leaves by splashing rain. A solution? Well, even disease-resistant cultivars can fall prey to this problem, but you can try and keep the foliage as dry as possible in early spring. Avoid that overhead watering. If you absolutely must overhead water, do it before 10 a.m. so leaves have a chance to dry off during the day. Remove any black spot infested leaves as soon as possible. Rake and dispose of them from around the plant. They like to fall near the base of the plant, and as I said, they're spread by splashing water, so don't allow that to happen. Prune back canes to buds below the infected area. And don't compost any of this infected material. Put it in the garbage. Last resort is spraying with a fungicide. Follow all directions on the label for timing and your own safety. Downy mildew. Now, if your roses have downy mildew, you will notice angular reddish spots right along the leaf vein right here. You may also find spore masses that form on the underside of the leaf. This is caused by the fungus Peronospora sparsa. Unfortunately, this problem may be systemic in the rose plant, and when you purchased it, you accidentally got a rose that was infected. It overwinters on leaf debris and stems and causes the canes to die back and the leaves to fall off. It's really active in high humidity when the temperature is over 80 degrees. Now, downy mildew can be very difficult to diagnose, so if you're in doubt, contact your local master gardener and get an accurate identification of the problem. It's also a bit difficult to control since it progresses quite quickly. Always make sure the roses you purchase are disease-free. You should examine them before purchase, or if you happen to acquire a rose from a friend, check it carefully for any problems. Make sure you plant so that the rose has adequate airflow and is in full sun. And of course, I'm repeating myself, but avoid overhead watering after mid-morning. Always remove affected stems, leaves, and flowers. Put them in the garbage. Now, interestingly enough, with this disease, non-chemical controls are much more effective than chemicals. But if you finally cry uncle and you opt to use a fungicide, I just encourage you to be very careful and read the label for timing and strength of application. Powdery mildew appears on leaves and buds of roses with a mat of white, powdery looking fungal filaments like this. It looks like somebody dusted your rose with sugar. Ironically, it's more prevalent in the dry months of summer. Caused by the fungus Spirotheca penosa, the leaves become distorted, like you can see right here, and stunted and drop from the plant to the ground. If the mildew becomes really severe, the bush will fail to thrive. Now, prevention again is the most effective way to prevent powdery mildew damage. If you have done all the steps, you know, you should have minimal problems if you've taken all your prevention steps. If it does start to appear, just remove the stems, leaves, and flowers that show sign of the disease and rake them up from the ground. Interestingly enough, a vigorous spray of water on the leaves to wash off the mildew can be very effective, but just always do it early in the day and allow the leaves to dry off. If all that fails, as a last resort, a fungicide that targets powdery mildew can be used. Rust. This is a really interesting disease of the rose. It begins in spring and peaks in early summer. You can see these rusty spots all over the tops of the leaves, and on the underside, small rusty lesions appear that are powdery orange. Rust is produced by the fungi of the fungus Pharyngium. The rust spores are blown by the wind, not splashed onto susceptible leaves. That fungus will weaken the plant and cause early leaf loss. It tends to grow in moisture on leaves. Again, the solution. Well, rust might be hard to control on these plants. Rust is a little tough. Remove infected stems, leaves, and flowers. Practice the best sanitation you can by removing all leaves fallen on the ground. That may disrupt the life cycle of the disease. And I will say that fungicides will effectively control rust when you use them according to directions. Just to save the pollinators, I always encourage you to just use this as a last resort. It can be very difficult to control once the plant develops the symptoms. So again, another case for monitoring frequently. And the ever popular aphid. Aphids really cause aesthetic damage to roses, and they are the main pest of roses here in the Pacific Northwest. They suck the sap from the leaves of the rose, and they secrete a sweet, sticky substance called honeydew, which promotes a sooty mold fungus, which is very unattractive on your leaves. Look at this dead aphid. It's a great picture. Aphids cluster in large colonies on and below young flower buds and the tender leaves that are just emerging. So they weaken the flower bud necks and they distort the leaf growth. Solution? Well, monitor every week in early spring. That's the key to success with aphids. Controlling them early will keep their numbers low. Also, consider planting flowers that will attract lacewings and ladybugs near your roses. They'll predate and eat up those aphids. I've attached a link to a handout with just many plants that will attract beneficial insects that predate on aphids. You can also spray aphids with a strong stream of water to knock them off. You can hand pick them, or you can squish them when you spot them on leaves and stems. That's always a very satisfying feeling. Now, after doing all that talking about pests and diseases, I just wanted to end with some pictures of two absolutely stunning rose gardens. These roses are repeat blooming, colorful, and fragrant. I mean, who could ask for anything more in a garden plant? I've given you a lot of information today about roses, and I hope I've convinced you that growing roses is a simple task. You know, when you think about it, people who came out here on the Oregon Trail and wanted to bring something from home often took a cutting of a favorite rose, which they gave very little water to along their route, and they could plant in their new space when they came to Oregon or California or wherever they ended up. So roses can be tough and they can be easy to take care of. I thank you for joining me today to learn how easy and rewarding it is to grow roses in the Pacific Northwest. In review, you learned how to select a rose for your garden, how to choose and prepare a planting site, the importance of monitoring for pests and diseases to keep your rose looking at its best. By the way, this little guy in this picture, thanks to Sharon Andrews, by the way, is a crab spider. He's lying in wait for a bee or leafhopper to nibble on. He is a beneficial insect and one that you will be pleased to see in your garden. You will find on the link to this video that all the resources I used I've included here so you can refer to them and if you have any questions. And now I'm done and we have time for some questions. So I'll stop sharing and look for Leah.
Hi there, Cheryl. Thank
Hi,
you
Leah.
so much. Wow, my brain is just exploding with all that information. I have a few questions, and one of the ones it kind of talks about like you were talking about people coming, in covered wagons and bringing their roses.
Uh-huh.
A lot of us have moved into a home with roses that we have no way to identify what they are.
Mhm.
So, number one, how can we identify what they are? And then I have a follow-up question on that.
That is an excellent question, and I'm sure there are many gardeners out there that have inherited roses. And all I can say is take photographs, go to the American Rose Society website, and do some research and see if you can't find your rose there. It should be listed there. They have a great website, and it's pretty user friendly.
Okay.
And if it's, if it's a type of rose, that's a little bit different. But the specific rose, there are some, by the way, some roses, if it's a very old house and you've inherited a very old rose, there are, sorry, I just lost that train of thought. It's coming back to me. I saw a note pop up and that made the thought go away. Oh, some roses that were registered no longer exist, but they still are in the registry. So even if you have a
Oh,
very old rose, it should be there.
cool. Okay. So, if we don't know what the variety is, say we just haven't had time to figure that out, how do we know how to prune them? Because the different roses have different, is there a
Not an uncommon question. And I just want to reiterate this. Roses are very, very forgiving. If you do the general pruning tips that I gave you, remove disease, damaged canes, you prune the rose down so it doesn't get whipped in November, and then you shape it in a vase shape so that it produces blooms, you should be fine. Roses will forgive you.
they're tough. Yeah.
They are tough and they
Yeah.
will forgive. I mean, I know that I have incorrectly pruned in my early garden days roses, and that rose continued to reward me with flowers, even though I didn't prune it exactly to type.
Okay. Another got a couple of questions about this weird weather that we've been having.
Oh man.
And it says my rose is already leafing out due to warm weather. Can I still use dormant spray?
If she, is she I'm asking her back a question that she can't answer. I would say my actually I as an aside, I have removed all the leaves in the fall from my rose, and we
Hmm.
had such crazy weather. It leafed out again, and I thought, oh dear, what am I going to do? So when I pruned in February and then applied dormant spray, it eliminated that problem. I would say, if it's got 4 to 6 inches of growth on it, perhaps not. But if it doesn't have that much growth on it, I would say dormant spray just to avoid pests and diseases that might have overwintered.
Okay.
Does that seem clear?
Yeah. The other
She's
question
right. We've
was,
had hinky weather.
yeah. The other question was I went outside yesterday and realized my roses are already putting out new leaves before I had a chance to prune them. Should I still prune? Are there any
Yes, I would.
changes to pruning?
No, I would say no. Keep the same pruning methods. The rose will be fine. They are just confused.
Yeah, as
We're all
are we
confused.
all. Yeah, I went to a seminar at the Northwest Garden Show last week, and the gal from Heirloom Roses was talking, and she said, "So the pruning date for roses is President's Day."
Correct.
She said, "But I haven't done that yet, so I'm going to go home and do that now." So even the rose professionals kind of get
Right. They
behind the
use
eight
that
ball
as a
there.
rule of thumb. It's
Yeah,
like a way of reminding yourself, oh, President's Day, gosh, I
yeah,
need to think about my roses because you do want to get dormant spray on while they're dormant,
yeah.
but it has been a difficult year. And my rose, it kind of depends on where your rose is planted. Mine is planted in a protected area, has a tendency to put on new growth more quickly than a rose
Ah,
that's planted out away from the house.
okay. So that leads me to another one of the questions is, so they're supposed to have 6 hours of sunlight a day. Does it matter if it's like east 6 hours, west, south? Does
No,
that really matter? Okay,
no.
just 6 hours. Okay.
Just yeah, it needs sunlight. So there are
Okay.
a few cultivars now that will tolerate dappled sun, like
Yeah.
the climbing rose I showed will tolerate dappled sun.
Mm-hmm.
So watch the labels.
Yeah.
Because some people
Um,
struggle with that. They have very tall trees and they just get filtered sunlight. So
yeah. Yeah, there are a few that they mentioned. Speaking about labels and disease resistance, you said, so get resistant rose. So does that mean if a rose is labeled as disease resistant, it's disease resistant to all of the different diseases that you mentioned, or specific ones that you might have a
it should be
problem with?
disease. It should be resistant to though I enlisted when I talked about the diseases, they're the most common ones that we will find in the Pacific Northwest. So they should be resistant to those common diseases of the Pacific
Okay.
Northwest.
Um, Another question that I wanted you to answer and just kind of reiterate, someone was asking about container roses, and they wanted to know if they should put rocks in the bottom of the container.
No, not necessary. Not necessary.
Okay.
And I understand why they want to make sure that that rose gets well drained. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's got adequate holes in the bottom, you use a good quality potting soil, fertilize regularly, your rose should be just
Yeah.
fine.
I really liked you mentioning about the straight-sided pots because
Oh
I
gosh.
too have had that, one that goes like this and getting it out is just a nightmare. So
I
yeah,
have been known to take a hammer to the pot. I
yeah.
one time I had to cry uncle, and I got a hammer and went, okay, bye pot.
I I used a machete to cut the roots.
Yeah, if I have a strong man around that can
Yeah.
help me with that, it's great. If I don't,
Yeah,
my
so
hammer is ever ready.
I'm a straight pot person all the way now.
Well, it's
Okay.
much easier to get that machete around the straight pot edge than
Yeah.
if you have one of those very rounded ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you talked about shrub and landscape roses. Is there a difference between a shrub rose and a landscape rose?
I would say minor. I would say that I have a knockout rose, which is considered a shrub slash landscape rose, and I prune it somewhat upright. I've known other people that have planted shrub roses along the top of a bank where there's a wall, and they
Hmm.
prune them so they kind of tumble over. So
Just good.
there are some slight growth differences, but
Hmm.
they're they're both very carefree, have
Okay.
very carefree habit, and can be pruned to fit your need.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Oh,
the beautiful part about the knockout drift and carpet ones is that they aren't bothered by deer because um, I have a rose right, well, we have a lot of deer in my neighborhood, and
hmm.
they never touch my knockout roses. I have two or three of them. They're just not very tasty, I guess. They aren't fragrant. Deer will go for a hybrid tea every time.
Oh, really?
But yeah, yeah, and particularly the very, very fragrant ones, they'll
Hmm.
go for those right away. Unfortunately, they do.
Okay. Um, it's 1 o'clock, so
Oh
it's
my
time for,
gosh,
I know, time flies when you're having fun.
it
Yes.
does.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. Again, if you did not get your questions answered, you can ask a question when you get to the link that you'll be getting in the email with the resources and the recorded video. Please join us next week, and we hope to see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.